As we go live and people join us, Kasim, I think Substack is becoming like the Twitter alternative. I think it's becoming the place to be.
I agree. And I think they've done a good job of kind of uniting the various forms of social media. You've got a great long form, you've got the short form notes, you've got this live option, you've got the podcast option. And I think their ability to allow you to kind of own your followers via email addresses and then be able to, be monetized by your followers is exciting and productive, better than most other places.
By the way, welcome everybody as you come in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. That great voice. By the way, Kasim, you've got a fucking radio voice. That's a very good voice. Belongs to a friend of mine, Kasim Rashid. You can find him here on Substack. You ought to subscribe to him on Substack. A human rights lawyer, an author, and a dad, and an all-around great guy who, back in the day, Kasim and I probably went at each other. I've had a long, weird journey, but Kasim, good to be with you, my friend. Thanks for taking some time tonight.
I appreciate this opportunity as well, Joe. And look, I think the beauty of why I appreciate this friendship is not because we agree on everything, it's because we find ways to have conversations despite disagreements. And I think that's lacking in this world. And I'll be the first one to say, when I announced that we're doing this, I got plenty of texts and DMs from people saying, "Why are you talking to Joe? He's a lost cause." And my point to them is, if that's how we dismiss everyone, we're not going to get very far. And Joe's, in my view, Joe has shown that he is committed to continued growth and continued improvement. And I have to respect that. So, we may not agree on everything, but I respect the fact that you're fighting every day for our democracy and to be a better person. And I think that's a lot. And I appreciate that about you.
Kasim, I appreciate that. But let's start there. Let's start somewhere where we probably agree. I became a Democrat. Still weird to think, but I became a Democrat 2 months ago exactly. Give me you've been involved in the Democratic Party for a hell of a lot longer than I have. Give me your kind of status report to a new Democrat right now. Let's start there. Where do you see this party? Where are they at? What do they need to do in your estimation?
I see the party as a party full of immense potential. I see a younger movement. I see a newer movement who is aligned on many of the things that we care about: working families, having sustainable living, having a sustainable climate, a sustainable economy. But I'm seeing a party leadership, unfortunately, that is deeply disconnected from what folks want and what folks are demanding. And I think that's why we have a 20-some% approval rating. And I've said this before, that it should be a source of deep embarrassment for party leadership. And I'll name names: Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, that while the man in the White House is a credibly accused rapist and likely on a list of pedophiles by Epstein, somehow the party has a worse approval rating than that man. That should be a deep source of shame and reflection on what we need to do better. Now, that said, I'm not just throwing the whole party out, because I look at the people and I see the people. They're compassionate, they're thoughtful, they want fighters, and I think that's what the party leadership needs to deliver.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Kasim, I love what you just said right there, because I say it often. Donald Trump is an utterly horrible human being, probably a pedophile, an insurrectionist, a fascist. He's cruel. He's a pathological liar. You and I could go on and on. And yet the Democratic Party lost to him. So my God, my friend, if that doesn't demand self-reflection, I don't know what will, right?
Agreed 100%. And I think, one of the things that I think we agree upon is wherever somebody is on Zohran Mamdani, he won the Democratic nomination, and he did it with record turnout. He did it with new voters. He did it with young voters. The party spent $20 million on how to talk to young white men. He did it with young white men. I mean, what more do you want out of this guy? And party leadership is making excuse after excuse as to why they can't endorse him. And I wrote a piece about this, that if you look at the kind of the vitriol that came out of like Kirsten Gillibrand's mouth and some other Democrats, it's indistinguishable from some of these MAGA nut jobs as well. And that's a great way to drive your party away or drive your voters away.
So why, man? Why can't they? So he wins the Democratic Party primary in New York City. He's the Democratic nominee. I'm a new Democrat. I look at him, Mamdani, and I say, okay, I disagree with him on a lot of stuff, but damn it, he's my nominee in New York City.
Yep.
Let's all get behind him. I don't understand it. Why? What are they afraid of?
Well, I think it's a combination of three things. I think one, it's the fact that there's a racial element to it. I mean, let's just be honest. There is an Islamophobic streak. I've run for Congress twice. I can tell you, I got Islamophobic bigotry from Democrats, and we just need to be honest about that. And the party needs to reconcile with that. Two, I think he
Wait. Back up, my brother.
Yeah.
You ran for Congress twice. I know that. You're saying you felt more anti-Muslim bigotry from fellow Democrats than even the right?
I won't say more, but the fact
Okay.
that it was noticeable and the fact that it was impactful, it can't be ignored. I mean, we need to be honest
Okay.
about that. And
Yeah.
I will say that even when I ran against a Republican, and he was just full speed ahead with the anti-Muslim attacks,
Yeah.
there were plenty of high-ranking Democrats that just kind of sat silent and said, we're not going to worry about it. And to me, that
Mhm.
silence is unacceptable. So I think that's one part of it. I think the second part of it is they're probably not very happy with the fact that he's been able to do things that they can't. I think there's an ego level involved. He's been able to get these younger voters out. He's been able to get a higher turnout out. And he's been able to do it authentically and sincerely without the big corporate dollars or the big lobbyist dollars,
Mhm.
swooping in. And then the third part about it is I think that they are scared to death that he has the pulse of the party on Israel Palestine, on the fact
Mm.
that he's talking about upholding international law, that he's being critical, that he would arrest Netanyahu. I don't think he actually has authority to do that, but that he would. That he's critical, what he's called, war crimes and genocide. And I think with the amount of lobbying from AIPAC and other pro-Israel organizations, people like Jeffries and Schumer and Booker and Gillibrand, and the list goes on and on. They're just, that's where the loyalties are, is to what these lobbyists are telling them to do, these corporate lobbyists, these AIPAC lobbyists. And I think we need to call that out for what it is, because it is detached from what Democrats actually want right now. And if party leadership doesn't recognize that, I fear we're going to risk losing midterms and lose it again in 2028.
We'll get to the Israel thing in a minute, because you and
Yeah,
I generally we butt heads on that
yeah,
issue
yeah, of
respectfully.
course.
But you make a great point, my friend. I've been like I think we've been living in an anti-establishment populist moment for a while.
Hmm.
Along comes Trump. And Trump's a fucking evil populist. He's a demagogue,
Sure.
but he tapped into that.
Yep.
By the way, Bernie Sanders back in 2016 tapped into that.
I agree. Yeah.
It like the Democrats haven't even recognized this populist moment. Along comes Mamdani, and even if I disagree with him on stuff, he represents that anti-establishment thing, doesn't he?
I agree. And I think he does a good job of that. And I think one of the hypocrisies that people see in the Democratic Party is you can't hold a march that says no kings, but then not respect primaries, but then not hold primaries. There's an inherent hypocrisy there. Because when people march in the streets to say that we don't like the fact that Republicans are paying homage to this king, they're right to do so. But then when the Democratic Party establishment says, well, we know we had a primary and he won with record numbers, but we're going to pick our guy anyway, and ignore what the will of the people want, it sends a message. And Joe, you probably have seen the polling that of all the folks who stayed home in this 2024 election, the number one reason they stayed home was Gaza and Palestine. That was the number one reason why they stayed home. There were more than 30 polls.
Wait. In the 24 election?
The 24 election, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And this wasn't a surprise. More than 30 polls said that, we need to stop funding Netanyahu. 77% of Democrats, and by the way, that number now is 92% of Democrats. When 92% of your base is saying, do the thing or stop doing the thing, and you disagree with them and you go the other way, you're not going to win an election because you're going against what 92% of your base basically wants.
How much, put a number on it,
Yeah.
how much of the Democratic establishment fear of Mamdani is he's too much of a socialist or he's too anti-Israel? How would you break down that fear?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to quantify. I would still say the majority is probably the stuff about Israel. And the reason is, if you look at Mamdani's record and if you look at his policies and you compare them to FDR, they're actually pretty similar. I would say that Mamdani should call himself an FDR Democrat because FDR talked about a jobs guarantee. He talked about if you can't pay a living wage, you have no right to do business in this country, and you should stop doing business in this country. That seems like a pretty radical statement to make nowadays. He talked about taxing the super wealthy at a 91% marginal tax rate, which is way higher than what Mamdani wants. So I think this whole socialism thing is kind of a red herring, when in reality, FDR was the most popular Democrat in the history of the country. And granted, Executive 9066 with the Japanese Americans, a horrific thing that he did. I'm not here to defend everything that he did. But I will say it says something that a man who ran on those economic populist policies was so popular, they had to literally amend the Constitution to prevent him from running for president again. And Mamdani is running on a lot of those similar policies. I think the bigger thing, honestly, is the United States' allegiance to Israel under all circumstances. It can do no wrong, and it will never be reprimanded or held accountable in any way, shape, or form. And the last point I'll make about that is
Yeah.
that's an evolution because you probably recall when Reagan called then Prime Minister of Israel when they were bombing Lebanon and said, "Stop it! This is a Holocaust." And the Prime Minister said, "Mr. President, I think I know what a Holocaust is." And Reagan said, "I don't care. Stop bombing immediately." And within 15 minutes, that war ended. So the fact that our Democrats are to further right of Reagan right now should be a five-alarm fire for every person. And the fact that it's not is also just deeply concerning.
Uh, Again, this is a question, my friend, from a very new Democrat,
Yep.
a Democrat who, in the big tent that should be the Democratic Party, would be a more conservative Democrat. Do you, brother, at all worry that, or let me rephrase it, can the party win if they are kind of where AOC and Mamdani are, Bernie, and where you say FDR was, so more of a progressive agenda? Can that win nationwide in your estimation?
Well, I think we have to look at how we're framing the conversation. I
Yeah.
don't know what labels mean anymore. Progressive, conservative, Democrat. They're all so mushy now, especially under 50. It kind of blends. What I would
Oh,
prefer to talk
absolutely.
Yeah, the way I would prefer to frame it is what are the policies that we're talking about? Universal health care is extraordinarily popular. It's popular because I think we can agree people shouldn't be going bankrupt because they get cancer. I think we should agree that if somebody gets in a car accident, it shouldn't ruin their life. It's popular economically for working class folks. Every study shows that we're spending double per capita of every nation on earth that provides healthcare as a human right. Studies show that we are actually waiting longer with our for-profit, exploitative private healthcare system than the nations that guarantee healthcare. Um, let's talk about a living wage. If the living wage grew at the same rate as corporate productivity and inflation, it'd be somewhere around $28 to $30 an hour right now. The Rand
So
corporations are great.
you see, Kasim, you see, if a 28 Democratic presidential nominee ran on a living wage and universal health care, a guaranteed right for everyone in the country. Again, as a new Democrat, I'm asking you, would that be a winning platform?
I think so. I think the polling shows us across the country, and I'm not talking about New York City, a super blue spot in the country. I'm talking across the country. The polling shows red or blue, universal health care, 69, 70% of people support it. Living wage, 68, 70% of people support it. Even climate justice and despite the demonization of the Green New Deal, people saw the infrastructure bill and the climate bill that Biden passed and how many jobs it was creating. We're seeing MAGA conservative farmers being like, oh, wait, Trump suspended all this and now I can't grow my farm because of these subsidies that Biden was providing. So I think that is a winning message. Anytime you get to ensuring people can put food on the table, I fundamentally reject this right-wing notion that people don't want to work. People want to work. There's nobody out there grifting just for the sake. I think the American people are a dignified people. Race, religion, all this stuff is second to the fact that people are dignified and they want to work for a living. But you can't say people are lazy just because they don't want to work for $12 an hour. That's not a sustainable living wage. You can't say people are lazy because you're forcing them to choose between
Of
diapers and medicine. It's just not fair.
course. Or it's like this the stupid racist thing Trump said yesterday when he
Yeah,
used the words inner city,
yeah,
like they don't want to do that work that Latinos do because it's bad for their backs and they don't want to do that.
right.
Agreed with all of that, and I mean everybody wants people to be fed and we want people to have great health care and the best schooling. In politics, we debate and argue about how to achieve those things. Kasim, do you think, like when I became a Democrat 2 months ago, I thought, okay, the party's got to be a big tent. We got to be a tent big enough for Joe Walsh and Zohran Mamdani. Is that the way to win, or is the way to win? Come on, let's. I don't care as much about, and I don't mean this critically about the Joe Walshes. If they want to be a part of us, fine. But the energy is more, and I don't want to use labels, but I will in this platform that might veer more progressive. That's how you win instead of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, but that's where I go back to how are we framing this? Because what we know about the way Zohran Mamdani ran his campaign, and I've talked to his comms team directly, right
Mhm.
at the senior levels, and they said that after Trump won in last November, he spent the next month looking at the data, seeing where there were the biggest rightward shifts, and he went and talked to those folks and said, "Why did you vote for Trump?" He asked, I don't know how many countless people, and then based off of those conversations he built his platform to say free childcare, free buses, a 2% tax on millionaires, and then the grocery store, affordable groceries. Now, if he's talking to Republicans, people who voted Republican, and arriving at that, and then winning with record numbers and record turnout, I have to believe that you can't just label those progressive issues. I think those are fundamental humanity issues, right? Making sure people can afford where they live, making sure people have food on the table, they can get to work. To me, this is not a left versus right issue. This is a basic human dignity issue. And I think those are the values that we need to run on. Let's remove these labels of progressive versus liberal versus conservative, centrist. Let's talk about, are you helping me make sure I can feed my kids? And if you are, you got my vote. I think that's how Trump duped people into voting for him. He never had any intent of doing that. If the Democratic Party wants to get back to being the party of working people, we need to fight for these values and these policies that actually elevate working people.
Well, no, Kasim, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Again, the devil's in the details. Like,
Yeah.
right, we want everyone to live good, healthy lives and be able to eat and put food on their table and all the
Yeah.
rest. And if you don't believe in that stuff, then get lost.
Yeah.
But if you do believe in those basic human dignity issues, then let's have conversations about the most humane and effective ways to do that
Right.
in a free society.
Right.
But I think even more than issues, I think this is like, it's not left, right. It's establishment versus anti-establishment. There are a lot of more people than voters who voted for Mamdani, Trump, and Eric Adams, like 3 election cycles in a
Yeah.
row,
Yeah.
because people are looking for something different.
Yeah.
They're pissed off at establishment politics.
Yeah.
Do you buy that?
I do. I do. And I think we see that. I mean, there's a reason why the organization End Citizens United, every year when they poll Democrats, Republicans, people on the left and the right, more than 90% say get corporate money, get PAC money, super PAC money out of politics. As divided as our country is, this is something that we agree upon. Get this corporate money out of politics. I saw a quote by Teddy Roosevelt from, I don't know how many decades ago, where he warned, get corporate money. We should pass a law to ban corporate money. So this is something that our leadership saw coming a long, long time ago. And I think it's that unifying message that is effective because it tells people that, hey, when you vote for me, I'm accountable to you. I'm not going to be accountable to Verizon or to Walmart or to Amazon. I'm going to be accountable to you, the fellow small business owner, the fellow person that I'll see at a PTA meeting, the person that my kid goes to karate class with your kid. that we've gotten away from that, and I think that's where there's just a lack of trust in politics in general. I mean, you served in Congress, you know this. Congress has an 11% approval rating, but a 90 some percent reelection rate. Explain that. If any business had an 11% approval rating, it would be out of business overnight. It wouldn't get reelected at a 91% rate. It's being reelected because it's being artificially upheld by these corporate PACs and these lobbyists, and that's fundamentally the problem.
It's being artificially upheld by a lot of things, but I
Yeah.
agree their rating is in the toilet. Um, and I mean, Mamdani, I think finally showed Democrats how to engage in this populist moment, how to fight. More than anything, too, Hasim, again, I disagree with him on a number of issues. He's authentic. I mean, he is who
Yeah.
he is.
Yeah.
And there is you know this because you've been involved in politics, there is a yearning among Democratic voters for authenticity.
Yeah.
Trump gives the illusion that he's authentic. It's all bullshit.
Yeah.
But so many Democratic politicians are ruled by consultants and pollsters. I got to watch what I say. I don't want to fucking offend anybody. I didn't see any of that with Mamdani.
No, I didn't either. And I think that's what people love about him. He's pretty straightforward on what he believes, why he believes it. And look, he did his homework, right? He knew he would be attacked for his views on Israel, so he built strong alliances with Jewish leaders. Brad Lander is a very smart man. He didn't endorse Mamdani for some political gain. He endorsed him because he trusts him. Jerry Nadler is a very smart congressman. He didn't support Mamdani because he's got something to gain from it. I mean, he's one of the senior, most powerful politicians in the country. And so he's done an effective job there. And I think that no politician is going to be perfect. But at the end of the day, if we are a party that listens to our voter base, listens to our voters want us, and if we're going to scream vote blue no matter who when it's a centrist, then you better believe that you got to show up when it's not a centrist and show that vote blue no matter who's not just an empty slogan, but we actually mean that once we pick the nominee, then we have to go forward. Look, and I'll say this, I wasn't terribly pleased with what Harris and Biden, what their policies were in terms of Israel and Palestine, and especially on healthcare domestically. But you better believe once that was decided that she was going to be the nominee, I campaigned, I fought hard, and we came up short, but I expect reciprocity as well.
Well, Hasim, you did, to your credit.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of young voters didn't. A lot of Muslim American voters didn't. A lot of progressives didn't. You make a good point. I mean, I became a Democrat, and I'm hoping Democrats embrace a more moderate conservative guy like me. How can I ask for that and not embrace Mamdani or AOC or Bernie? Yeah. So you're right. It is a two-way street. I would argue that a lot of folks did stay home and not vote for Harris because of the Palestine issue and a number of other issues.
Yeah, they did. And I will say this, you've been very vocal about having the need for reciprocity, and I commend you on that because you haven't shied away from that. So thank you for that. I think
I'm so Kasim. I'm so fucking pissed off. Cory Booker, neighboring state. He's asked yesterday 4 times, will you endorse Mamdani? And he won't. Yeah. And I'm just sitting there and I wanted to scream. Yeah. I've only been a Democrat 2 months. Of course I'm going to endorse him. It kills me.
I wish he would just be honest about why instead of this, I don't get into New York politics. My dude, you've endorsed every mayoral candidate the last 12 years. What magically happened?
Yes.
Now? But I did want to make one other point regarding the folks who stayed home. Look, I think it's important to, one, understand why they stayed home, but two, and I say this as an American Muslim, I follow this stuff extremely closely. Yes, there was a large contingent in Michigan that stayed home. But nationwide, if you look at the polling, the exit polling done by the AP and Fox News combined, they do it every presidential cycle. Would you believe me? I didn't believe the data myself until I saw it with my own eyes, that Harris won the American Muslim vote by a larger margin than did Joe Biden. She won in 24 by a larger margin than did Joe Biden. And so nationwide, American Muslims, despite our anger and outrage over Palestine, we still recognize that Trump is a fascist and we cannot let this guy win. We still came out. And every demographic, with the exception of white women and white men, voted majority for Harris. That's just a reality. The fact that folks stayed home the Democratic Party needs to reckon with that, need to understand there's a reason why. And right now, I still feel like we're going in the wrong direction from a leadership standpoint. And until that changes, I'm still afraid of what's going to happen in midterms, especially as Trump pulls these, fascistic
Yeah.
shenanigans in Texas and probably in other red states as well.
Kasim, you're right. Look, I was out there every day in a battleground state last year campaigning for her.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I heard from voter after voter after voter who would tell me, Joe, I know Trump's a jerk. I know he's an asshole, but the Democrats are elitists. They look down on me. I heard that, a variation of that from a lot of voters.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why Democrats, on a percentage wise, lost the working class vote.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason why Trump got more working class Latino and black vote. It should never be. But I think the Democrats grew out of touch. Do you buy that?
I completely do. Look, I don't understand why we were holding concerts with Beyonce and it makes no sense to me. I've never in my entire life said, well, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. Oh, Beyonce's voting for somebody, or oh, the celebrity I like is voting. Okay, I'm going to vote. It just doesn't work that way. The reason why, by the way, the celebrity endorsements work for Mamdani is because he was authentic and built the trust authentically, and then they came on afterwards as like, yeah, we also agree he's authentic. Not the other. You're not going to build authenticity because some celebrity, endorsed you. So I think, and by the way, I was one of the guys who's working aggressively to get the social media messaging out there in that space. And we were, talking to the party, look, invest in content creators to create this authentic, organic content, and you'll get a bigger push. They didn't do that. They gave that money to people like Beyonce. And what ended up happening was we saw a 11-point shift to the right for people 20 to 29. That to me is fumbling the ball on the 1 inch yard line and letting them run the other way for a touchdown. It's inexcusable.
Yeah.
Again, it's the elitist out of touch mentality that has to change.
Yeah, and look, I don't think the Democratic Party can win anymore by just saying Trump is bad.
No, I agree.
But I will say, Kasim, the fucking cruelty of what he's doing on immigration, his tariffs, I mean, and all the unconstitutional shit he's doing.
Yeah.
His numbers with certain voting groups are hemorrhaging again.
Yep.
But my fear is Democrats are looking at this and they're thinking to themselves again, hey, we can get the House back by just saying Trump sucks again, because look what he's doing. Gosh, I hope the leadership, I hope candidates don't think that.
Again,
They got to offer more.
Yeah, I'm working with about a half dozen or so candidates running for Congress, and none of them think that. They all understand that we need to meet voters where they are. We need to knock doors. We need to have authentic messaging and authentic framing. At the end of the day, though, who holds the keys to the treasure chest? Who holds the keys to the money? And that's going to be the party establishment leaders. And until and unless they recognize that this strategy of just saying that, hey, he's a fascist, it didn't work in 2016. It barely worked in 2020. People forget, if about 70,000 voters in swing states went the other way in 2020, Trump wins again in 2020. That was it was a much closer election than people realize. And then it didn't work in 2024. Until and unless the party leadership, and by the way, and this is going to piss off a lot of folks in the party leadership, but just retire. Like, we've had 6 Democrats die in office in the last year, and God rest their souls. But you should not be dropping like flies dying in office. Just retire, get out of the way. Air traffic controllers are forced into retirement at 55. Maybe 55, 60 is a good age for Congress as well. And it's not unprecedented. A lot of, functioning democracies around the world have mandatory retirement at 60 or 65. But when you got, 146-year-old Dianne Feinstein in office, not even able to function and has power of attorney to her daughter because she can't make decisions about herself, why is she making decisions for 330 million people? That to me is an excellent way to turn people off when people who are 75, 80, 85 years old are making decisions that will impact the next 60 years that will not affect them at all.
I grew to be a really big fan of Nancy Pelosi because I think in Trump's first term, nobody stood up to him like she did.
Agreed.
But my God, what in God's name is she still doing in Congress? 82 or 3 years old. She's not speaker anymore. It's that kind of thing, Kasim, that I think most Democratic voters are just so pissed about.
Yeah. And the thing is, and I can even go back to RBG, right? I mean, let's just be honest with this. And it was taboo when she passed because she was so heroic in the work she had done. But the fact of the matter remains that we have to start recognizing that no one person is bigger than our democracy, bigger than our republic. And we have to look at the long-term vision. This is one thing that Republicans do extremely well. It took them 50 years to overturn Roe, but they put in the pieces and they made it happen. And now they're gutting the Voting Rights Act. It took them 25 years to do that, but they're doing that as well. They're making gerrymandering formal policy. We need newer, younger, fresher leadership. And unless we do that, I think we're also undermining our ability to run on something other than Trump is bad. It's just not going to work.
So before we get to the Middle East, I'll ask you one more. Tell me if you agree with this.
Yeah.
This is coming from a former Tea Party guy. I think the Democratic Party needs their Tea Party moment. Now, you and I may disagree on what the Tea Party stood for, but it was a populist, anti-Republican Party establishment movement, like get out of the way, Republican Party establishment. You got to go back to your roots. You may disagree, Kasim, with what they thought those roots were, but I think the Democratic Party needs their version of a Tea Party moment, and maybe that's beginning to happen now, where the conscience of the party rises up and says, get the fuck out of the way, establishment, let's go.
I think your description of the Tea Party is actually pretty accurate. I think overall that's really what that was about, and it was effective. I mean, look at the party now compared to 15 years ago. You wouldn't recognize it anymore. I think the Democratic Party needs to have that moment as well. But the good news, I think, is we have a deep enough bench. We've got young voices. We've got dynamic voices who are able to do that. My question is really, this is what it's going to come down to. Is the establishment going to recognize this and gracefully move out of the way and pass the keys, pass the baton, pass the torch to the next generation? Or are voters going to get fed up with it and say, we're done with y'all, either burn it all down or we're going to vote you out? Or the third option, which God, I hope doesn't happen, is the MAGA Republicans just take over in full and, Supreme Court decides, you know what, Trump does deserve a third term. Or, you know what, we actually will never question the immunity of the president. He can do whatever the hell he wants. And then we are full-blown autocracy, which is a real threat at this point.
And by the way, you said this earlier. Maybe I misheard it. I believe that any Democrat running for office now, this year, next year, needs to say, Trump is a fascist, here's why. And, oh, by the way, everything costs too much. And we've got to do better by working people and help provide this. I mean, I think the message has got to be both, right?
100%. Yeah. I mean, okay. I think we need to acknowledge the real threat, and we need to offer a meaningful answer to that threat. It can't just be, he's a fascist, I'm not, so vote for me. It's got to be, he's a fascist, and here is my strategy, my plan, my proven model to show you how I'm going to make your life economically better, pay your rent, help you put food on the table, make sure your kids can get to college, make sure you can. That's all critical. We need to do that. We're not doing that right now.
What should the let's get to where where you and I, we agree on a lot here, but we disagree on plenty. Yeah. What should the Democratic Party's position platform be on Israel, the Palestinians, and Gaza? If you wrote the platform, what would it be?
Justice. Maintaining justice. Maintaining justice so that Jewish people and Palestinians can live in comfort, in peace. And the thing is, when you study history, when you study the history of the Palestinian region, of what do you want to call it, Israel, Palestine, occupied Palestine, you find something really significant. You find that from the time that Caliph Omar, a few years after the Prophet Muhammad died, entered Jerusalem, Jewish people were protected and safe. It was under Muslim rule that Jewish people thrived. And it was finally in 1066, when they were ousted by the Crusaders, that there was violence against Muslims and Jews by these Crusaders. And when it was retaken by General Salahuddin, Jewish people were once again allowed to re-enter Jerusalem. It's why all these ancient Jewish sites are still there and still protected. Under the Mamluks, the Jews were protected. Under Muslim rule in Spain, the Jews were protected. And this is well documented history. What we're seeing now is not a religious battle. And I can't emphasize that enough. And you should see my inbox, Joe, my inbox, my DMs. I am getting an overwhelming number of emails and DMs and subscriptions from Jewish readers who are, one, recognizing that this is an injustice, a genocide, and two, appreciating that I'm not tolerating any form of anti-Semitism, because I will not. If somebody says something anti-Semitic, I block them, I remove them, and if they're a paid subscriber, I refund their money because I want them to know they have zero right to be anti-Semitic on my platform. So what the United States should be doing is upholding international human rights law, upholding justice, ending the illegal military occupation of occupied Palestine, and ensure that either they work as a just arbiter or they let the UN arbitrate without having the veto power of undermining, meaningful process and due process here.
What does the ultimate solution, though, in your mind look like?
Well, I think right now we have to recognize that we have solutions that have been offered. A return to the 1967 borders would be a great starting point. This is an important point, Joe. I don't think Americans realize that since 1967, the Israeli military has been illegally occupying Palestinian lands. I'm sure you've been to occupied Palestine, to Israel. So you've seen it
I've
firsthand.
been
The Israeli
everywhere.
military is occupying. So frame for a moment if China, if Russia, if Canada had a military occupation of your neighborhood and you had to go through a checkpoint to leave your house, to go to the grocery store, to go to school, to go to work, it is dehumanizing. It is demoralizing. It is infuriating. I saw this with my own eyes. I was stopped at gunpoint, at checkpoint after checkpoint, forced to show my papers, forced to show my passport, almost threatened with arrest at one point because I got so frustrated after being there for just a couple of weeks. Imagine living that. So one, a return to the 1967 borders until and unless that military occupation can end and we force Israel to uphold international human rights law and abide by its own borders. Look, people are going to crack. People are going to break. When you occupy people's homes and lands violently, it's not unreasonable or not surprising that people respond violently. That's just the way human beings are hardwired. I don't care where you are. The American Revolution is people were sick of being occupied by British military rule and they responded violently. We can't call them terrorists, they're revolutionaries. Now, I'm not justifying attacking civilians. I will always call that a war crime. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. What I'm pointing out is that to answer your important question of the first step has to be to end the illegal military occupation of Palestinian lands.
And again, the important context there, why Israel occupies the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and then Gaza. Israel was invaded again, and Israel fought back and secured those lands. If fairly consistent with history since 48, Israel was attacked, Israel won, Israel was attacked, Israel won, kept those lands. It isn't part of the problem here, Kasim, that it's more than just those 67 borders. Would the Palestinians be satisfied going back to just those 67 borders and leave it at that?
Well, let's be clear about this point you made about attacked and they fought back and whatnot. Military occupation is not a permanent solution, not under any form of international law. The international law is explicitly clear that if you are a military occupier, it has to be temporary. And while you are occupying, you must, as an obligation, ensure free flow of goods, services, healthcare, medicine. You cannot disrupt the life of civilians. All of that is disrupted. So that's one in violation. Two, we have to define what we talk about regarding Israel. Is it the only democracy in the Middle East, or is it an ethno-Jewish state? Because it can't be both. Either you are a functioning democracy where people have equal rights under your constitution, regardless of race, religion, class, culture, what have you, or you're an ethno state where one class has higher rights and higher priorities than the other. I don't believe any country should prioritize people based on the color of their skin or their ethnicity, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's Israel, whether it's the United States of America. And so when you ask this question of would they be happy going back to the 67 borders, well, I think it would be a step in the right direction. But then the broader question has to be, go ahead.
No, then see, that's the concern then, because that's, and again, you and I got to continue this because we don't have time to go through, but that's, in essence, that's been offered a number of times to go back to. I mean, Arafat in 2000 was offered 94% of that, but would that, you said first step, if the Palestinians were given back that Gaza, it's yours, the West Bank, it's yours, let's live in peace, couldn't that be it?
So let me make a comment about the 2000 Arafat deal. Shlomo Ben Amin, who was a lead Israeli negotiator of that deal, himself went on record and said, if I was a Palestinian, I would not have taken that offer. It was a terrible offer. And it was never put in writing. It was never actually put in writing. And Arafat's like, what do you want me to negotiate against? Give me something in writing. And the verbal stuff, their own lead negotiator said, I wouldn't have taken it later on. So I know that's
you don't, Kasim, just so I know, and we'll continue this. You don't believe Arafat walked away in 2000 from a pretty decent offer?
Based on the testimony of the lead Israeli negotiator, my conclusion can only be that it was not a fair offer.
Okay, we respectfully disagree. But I guess the broader question, because we don't have time to drill down on this too much. If this notion of the two-state solution that so many people still pine for, could that be the two-state solution in your mind? Gaza yours, West Bank yours, go back to the 67 borders. Now let's live in peace.
Possibly, yes. I mean, I think possibly. But here's the thing, Joe. The conversation right now is there's a genocide happening as attested to by Israeli scholars, Israeli journalists, Israeli and Jewish Holocaust scholars, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Save the Children, B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization, Breaking the Silence, which are former Israeli soldiers. Children are being starved by Netanyahu right now. So we can have a robust conversation on which borders are right and what the right structure is. None of that changes the fact that at the very moment, as you and I are having a conversation right now, in the 1 hour we've been on here, another Palestinian child has been killed in a preventable manner, all due to Netanyahu's unilateral decision to continue bombing and the United States' refusal to hold him accountable. That has to stop.
Agreed. It is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza now. Agreed. Completely disagree with my good friend when he says all due to Netanyahu or Israel doing whatever they did. Agree with you about Netanyahu. A week after October 7th, I said Netanyahu could resign. I hold no quarter for Netanyahu. But I know you are smart enough to know that the humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza is not all because of what Israel's doing or done. Hamas, the terrorist government of Gaza, has some responsibility for the humanitarian crisis, no?
Well, again, when we talk about international laws, and as a human rights lawyer, that's what I'm obliged to. When we talk about international law, the occupying military has the obligation to provide food and medicine. Bar none. There's no exceptions to that. There's no excuses to be made for that. What we know from testimony after testimony of Israeli human rights organizations, of local journalists, a few who are allowed to report, remember, there's an illegal media blackout, from Cindy McCain, who by no means is some left-wing, liberal lunatic, the wife of the late John McCain, one of the staunchest defenders of Israel, from the Israeli military itself. New York Times just published a report about this. All of them are in agreement that there is no example of Hamas systemically stealing aid or preventing aid, none whatsoever. There's zero evidence of this at all. So you combine the fact that international law requires an occupying military power to provide food and medicine at the same rate as people consume with the fact that even the Israeli military itself is admitting on the record that, yeah, we actually don't have any evidence of Hamas stealing aid, yeah, this is absolutely 100% on Netanyahu and the Israeli government, and they need to be accountable for it.
Do you concur? Do you agree with me that Hamas, historically and certainly now, has always had a vested interest in having its civilian population suffer? That's always been part of Hamas's war strategy. Do you agree with that?
See, here's why I struggle with that question. Because Hamas committed a war crime on 10/7. They killed civilians. That's the war crime. And they should be held accountable. They should be prosecuted with the ICC, unquestionably. I also see Hamas as a reaction. Remember, they started 20 years after 1967. They're a violent reaction to 2 decades of military occupation. And I also know that while the initial Hamas charter called for the destruction of Israel, which I think is silly and foolish as a starting point,
and genocidal.
The distinction is that they are also explicit that their opposition is to the political entity, not to Jewish people. This is a critical note to make. And this is why my conversation earlier is important, because are we talking about a functioning democracy or are we talking about an ethno-religious state? Because if it's a functioning democracy, then yeah, absolutely, we should protect that at all costs. But if it's an ethno-religious state, I wouldn't fight for that any more than I would fight for Saudi Arabia to be an ethno-religious state. I don't think we should have theocracies. I don't think we should have ethno-religious states. I think in 2025, in humanity, we need functioning secular democracies where people have equal rights.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And that region is full of theocracies.
That's a problem.
We're not, and we got, what we need to do, you and I, we need to sit down in the same room with a nice camera and we can have a relaxed conversation. But to put a butt on this, because to me, in a war, both sides commit war crimes. This war is no different. I think the difference is it's not Israel's strategy to commit war crimes. It is the very essence of what Hamas is. You and I disagree on the notion of genocide. I do not at all believe this is genocide. But I don't want to get into that because we don't have time. Let's do this because this might be constructive. Criticize the Palestinian side for where we are, and I'll criticize the Israeli side. Go. Or I'll go first if you want, whatever.
No, I will absolutely unequivocally say I've got zero reason to defend Hamas or the actions that they've taken or the war crimes that they committed on 10/7. I have zero reason to defend them or to support them in that regard at all. I cannot criticize Palestinian civilians, however, any more than I can criticize American civilians for Donald Trump committing war crimes. The government is, to me, separate from people, especially when you have, Hamas, who after 2006 or 7 didn't allow elections any longer and had the arms. And those arms, by the way, were funded by, as the Times of Israel reported, Netanyahu himself. And so I can't condemn 2 million Palestinian people because of a right-wing, a violent government that committed war crimes on 10/7. I just can't do that. Any more than I can say the Jewish people of Israel should be condemned because of Netanyahu. I just don't think that's a fair statement to make. I will absolutely condemn Netanyahu and his government, but I can't carte blanche then by extension condemn all Israelis or Jewish people for that. I just don't think that's fair either.
Do you think, Kasim, ultimately Hamas is going to have to go?
Yeah, I don't see them being sustainable at all by any stretch of the imagination, and I don't think the Palestinian people want that either. I will just point out the reason why I'm so adamant on holding Netanyahu accountable is because even the families of the hostages call him Mr. Death, and they call him Mr. Death because they accuse him of repeatedly thwarting and blocking hostage deal after hostage deal. His own generals are on record saying that this man keeps blocking hostage deals. And I'll give you one really good example of that. Under Joe Biden in May last year, the UN was sent a proposal by Israel that this is the hostage deal that we will agree to. Joe Biden signed off on it. The UN passed a binding resolution. The Security Council passed a binding resolution. Hamas said, we accept this and we are prepared to enact this immediately. Right after, and there's a great headline that's just so shocking from the Times of Israel itself that says, Israel rejects hostage deal that it proposed to the UN. So Netanyahu proposed a hostage deal. Biden said, yep, this looks good to me. Let's send it to the UN. The UN said, yep, we are going to pass a binding resolution from the Security Council. It passed. Hamas said, we agree, we will abide by this exactly. And then Netanyahu said, nope, I'm backing out. I'm not going to do this anymore. This is May of last year. So, to me, we need to talk about that because that is part of why we're in this situation in the first place.
I think there's no doubt that Netanyahu has gotten as intransigent as Hamas is in not even seeking a deal. I'll say my final piece and I'll give you the final word, my brother.
Yeah.
Look, Israel leaves Gaza in 2005. Gaza had a choice. They could have turned it into something beautiful and peaceful and thriving. Instead, they turned it into a terrorist compound. I'm with you. I don't blame the Palestinian people for that. But every dollar of every aid for 20 years that went into Gaza went into building up a terrorist infrastructure to fire at Israel. Now, to criticize Israel, abso-freaking-lutely. Israel has gotten to the point Netanyahu needs to go. They are being influenced by this right-wing fringe of the government. And I don't even condemn the whole Israeli government because that would be like me blaming the American government for Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. But that right fringe has Netanyahu by the balls. And 2 months ago, Netanyahu said we're cutting off all aid. And that's done so much to get us to where we are now. So I think Netanyahu needs to go. But I think that the Palestinian people need to tell their leaders and find leaders who will live side by side with Israel. And the Palestinian people need to demand that. I'll give you the final word, my friend.
Well, I'll use my final word not to go further the debate, but just to acknowledge the importance of these conversations and how it's critical that we continue to have these conversations and continue to put pressure on the powers that be to stop this assault on Palestinian civilians, to ensure there's not only massive aid in terms of food, but also in healthcare. We're in a famine stage. Children cannot simply eat food anymore. They need medical treatment similar to the Jewish victims of the Holocaust when they were freed from these Nazi death camps. They couldn't just be given food. That's the status of Palestinian children right now, and that's where my focus is. And all my efforts, my fundraising, my advocacy is to ensure that these children, many of whom are, have no idea what Hamas is or what Zionism is or what Netanyahu is or USA. They're just children. And, I'll close with this quote because I hope we have this conversation more. And somebody asked what organizations or what the PCRF is a good one.
Yeah.
Humanity First is another great one. ANERA is another great one to contribute to. I work with these organizations closely and can vouch for them. But I'm reminded of a quote of James Baldwin, Joe, that I think you'll agree with, where he says that the children are all ours, all over the globe. And I'm beginning to think that whoever can't understand that is incapable of morality itself. These are children, and we have to stop the suffering that they're going through. And it's critical that we work with urgency because history will record what we did in this moment, and we need to be on the right side of history.
Well, that's a beautiful quote, Kasim, and I lied. I'm going to give myself the final word. I loved that quote. I would argue that Hamas doesn't give a damn about its children. And I would also argue that Netanyahu and his government have gotten to the point where they don't either. You're right. Right now, the humanitarian situation needs to be immediately fixed. And that's got to come, I think, generally from the free world and the rest of the Arab world. The last point I'll make is these are two Democrats, Kasim and Joe, having a respectful conversation about a really fucking difficult issue. You will not find this in the Republican Party, my former party. Kasim, it's an honor to be in this party with you, and I look forward to more conversations like this, my friend.
Likewise, brother. We'll have to do this in person next time.
In person longer. And by the way, everybody listening, follow and subscribe to Kasim Rashid on Substack right now. He puts out great, good, important stuff. Thank you, my brother.
God bless you.
Thanks, everybody. Be brave.